Sage Wanderer here, and welcome to my van down by the river. So if you're a fan of this channel, then you know that I'm a musician. Many of my new subscribers came by way of my video about the big trees. Why did the fallen angels cut down all of the giant trees? And I think many of you liked my rhythm of life analogy about the sounds that trees make and the universal rhythm. If you haven't seen that video, go back and check it out. And many of you have requested that I talk about a topic that's been going around the internet quite a bit lately, and that's called the weaponization of music. Now, has music been weaponized? Well, if you know me, then you know that they asked me to sell my soul to the devil, and I refused. And that story of the crossroads and the devil controlling the music business is very, very real and very true. See my true crossroads story. You can find that in my playlists. It's also one of my top 10 videos, I think, or top 15 videos. But so yes, the devil is in control of the music business. And as a part of that understanding, we're seeing music becoming darker and darker and having a stronger and more influential effect on humankind and on each generation. Every generation is more deeply affected by their music than the previous one, I think. And you could argue that the powers that be are using music to control the masses or to program us in a kind of mass MK Ultra programming sort of scenario. Now, within this, obviously there are some things that are undeniable. Lyrics are getting more X-rated. Lyrics are getting more political. Lyrics are getting more angry. There's more murder in music. There's more gore in videos and music. There's more hate in music than probably ever before. And so there's no doubt that they are weaponizing music. But there is a theory within a theory talking about how that the tuning of music has changed. In other words, to kind of simplify this for the non-musicians out there, that if you and I were going to play music together and I got a guitar and you got a guitar, maybe our guitars are going to be tuned the same. Before there were electronic tuners, that was a great big maybe. That chances are we're going to be quite a bit apart in how our instruments are tuned, and we're going to have to find common ground to tune to. Now, nowadays people go to the internet for all their information. But before there was the internet, before you could Google something, you had to grandpa it. You had to Uncle Sage it. In other words, you had to get in touch with somebody who had some gray in their beard who might know and ask them why that is. So I became aware that the tuning had changed from 432 to 440 hertz. In other words, once upon a time, the way we tuned was the master musician, the maestro. He got to pick the pitch that we all tuned to. And it made sense because either A, he had perfect pitch, or at least he had the best guitar and spent the most time on it. And so that he would maintain a pitch more reliably and keep his guitar in tune more reliably than somebody who doesn't practice as much or somebody that doesn't have as much talent. So the most talented guy, and sometimes the top two guys that argue about it, they would come up with a tuning. If the top two guys argued about it, they'd split the difference between it, and one would come down and one would go up, and they'd meet in the middle. But it was all done kind of organically. A lot of times it just kind of went this, la, 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 that sounds like an A, everybody got an A, here's an A, tune to this A. Now, if there was a piano involved, you just can't tune one of them, so the piano was king. And being the piano player, I was the king of the pitch, good or bad or ugly. Most old upright pianos were flat considerably. It happens over time. As an instrument settles, temperature, humidity, it all comes into play. Age, as an instrument ages, its natural predisposition or tuning lowers. So one has to continue to tune a piano. You have to tune it and you have to keep tuning it. And every time you move it, you got to tune it. But if you didn't have a piano to tune to, then the best picker would pick a pitch. Hopefully it hadn't been that long ago since he played with a tuner. Now, How did we set pitch? At 440 or at 432. It's at 440 now, but once upon a time, it was more common to find pitch at 432, a bit lower pitch. Classical music is typically all was performed originally at about 430 to 435 hertz. I won't get into the math of what a hertz is. It's just, let's just say it's an algorithm for defining pitch. It has to do with how many cycles per second a sound wave form takes to cycle. So 440 hertz means it takes 440 cycles per second. 432 is 432 cycles per second. So it's a slightly lower or slightly slower pitch. So in 1637, a lot of these rules were set place by a man named Marin Mersenne. He wrote a book called The Harmony of the Universe. In that book, he defined some laws of music. If a string is long and thin, or short and thin rather, it's going to have a real high pitch. If it's long and thick, it's going to have a lower pitch. So mass, length of string, and tension all play a role on pitch. And so what cycles per second, or hertz, are is that how many times does a string cycle or vibrate in a second. So once that was established, we had a way of measuring pitch, how many cycles per second. In 1711, John Shore invented the tuning fork. He was a trumpet player, and they'd been using pitch pipes. But once you set pitch to a pitch pipe, it drifts from age, moisture, humidity. Pitch was such a variable that one 18th century musician was quoted as saying that an A in Rome is actually B flat in Paris. So this tended to drift, and, you know, to quote one of my favorite movies, 220, 221, whatever it takes. So A432, A438. Some people were tuning up to A456 or A457. It just varied, and it varied from composer to composer. What tools did they have? Did they set the pitch by la la la, or did they have a tuning fork? When John Shore made his first tuning fork, it just so happened to be, as later we would find out, 512 hertz, because it was a C above middle C, which is 512 hertz. When you vary that for what A is, that would be 432. So he was making the first tuning fork in 1711 at 432. And so it was Joseph Saviere in 1713, just 2 years after the tuning fork was invented, who suggested that to make music more mathematical, they should stick with 232 hertz, because it caused all of the C's to be divisible by 2. And this is a pattern of numbers that you'll recognize from computers, because he called this scientific pitch. So if you set to 432 versus 440, then instead of having these numbers for all of the C's having all these remainders and decimal points, it rounded everything off to a nice even number. You have middle C being 256 hertz, C above that being 512 hertz, and so on. Does that make sense to you? 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512. Those are computer numbers, right? Well, those are the numbers for C if you're tuned to A432. If you tune up to A440, all the math gets wacky-doo, and it all gets weird with a bunch of remainders and whatnot. So in 1812, about 100 years later, the kings of Europe all met post Napoleon to kind of have a meeting on world peace. And instead of bringing peace to the world, they decided to standardize tuning Well, what they wanted to do was tell all of the orchestras to raise the pitch a little bit. If they just tune up a little higher, the music will be a little crisper, and maybe the music will be a little sharper, and maybe people won't be so sad that the aristocrats have all the money and the poor people have nothing. So they decided to put a little pep in everybody's step and told everyone to tune higher. And so people kept tuning higher and higher, and that's how you get some compositions from that era that can, from the 1800s, that can be as high as 456 or 457 hertz. So, I want to talk about the changeover to 440. When did that change? If you look into this conspiracy theory, you'll find that the people that are anti-A440 will claim that it was the Nazis who standardized tuning to A440, that they believed, there's some conspiratorial reason for them to believe that this would cause the people to follow them more easily and to slowly diminish their will if they were exposed to music that was tuned at a higher pitch. I don't know where they got that from. But I will say this, it was not their idea to set it to 440. By the time Goebbels and the Nazis standardized tuning to A440, it had already been standardized in most other countries to A440. And the first people to retune to A440 weren't Nazis. They weren't spiritualists. They were American musical instrument manufacturers. You see, this next bit of information, I don't know that you'll even find it on the internet, and you won't find it in any of these other videos, because this came directly from the founders of music instrument manufacturing in America. You see, what you may not know about me, that I was a child prodigy musician, and I started selling Baldwin pianos for various different piano stores starting at age 13. And that when I was 20 years old, I asked the question, how come when I learned to tune pianos, they taught me to tune pianos to 512 hertz for the note above middle C, the C above middle C, which equates to 432 hertz. Why was I taught to tune at 432 hertz when everybody knows that electronic tuners and everything are set to A440? And Chris Clemens, the founder of Baldwin Family Music Center, probably not even still alive now, who had trained and sat down with the people that ran the Baldwin piano store. I mean, this guy even knew Elton John because he played Baldwin pianos. And I asked him this question, and he told me the story of how Baldwin and Gibson and some other American manufacturers got together and decided to start tuning all of their instruments sharp to A440. And the reason being was because of rail car delivery systems, that they were delivering these things by train, and the constant vibration of the train would slowly but surely lower all of the strings in the piano equally down until you were looking at about an 8-tick loss or flatness in the piano. So Baldwin and other manufacturers then followed suit, started tuning them sharp, so when they got to their final destination, they would be at 432, the recognized standard tuning. And the reason we made that 8-point jump to 840 has nothing to do with these people in Germany, nothing to do with these Nazis or Goebbels or any of them. They were just trying to standardize music and go into the modern times. Maybe they had occultic undertones, I don't know, but they're not the ones that did it. It was American music manufacturers who were simply trying to produce a product that at the end point, it would be closer to being in tune. Because if you start at 432, you're going to end up at 428 or 426. And that's kind of flat and droopy and blah. So they wanted it to be crisp and tight. And so when broadcasting companies started telling their musicians how to tune for record making for broadcast on radio, the American Broadcasting Association adopted the standard shipping pitch of A440 for all of their records, and everybody had to start tuning up a notch to A440. I don't believe that A440 is some kind of destructive frequency. I don't believe that A440 is any kind of plot. Now, in another video, in the next video on this topic, this is part one of a two-part series, I'm going to talk about A432. its origins, its potentially occultic origins, and its implications to spiritualism and channeling and all of that kind of what we consider Eastern religion. Is there a connection between 432 frequency and the human body? We'll do that in another video. But as far as the Nazis weaponizing music, yeah, music's been weaponized, all right, through dark lyrics, through intentional tension-building chord structures by creators to evoke emotions in people and human beings. Yes, all of that is being used to make you buy things, to make you fall in love, to make you mad, to make you happy, to make you cry, to manipulate you. But they can do that in any tuning. And 432 or 440 doesn't really play into any of that as far as I can tell. And I believe that I knew the answer to this question before it ever came up, because I learned straight from Baldwin that it was their idea to tune them pianos sharp so when they got there they would sound decent. And that's the whole thing behind the 440 conspiracy. But the 432 conspiracy, the people that are arguing that 432 is somehow better, you better watch out for them, because they may be involved in the occult. And we'll look at the occultic connections to the 432 tuning. Don't. Next time with Uncle Sage.